Welcome to today's office hours, and today we will be talking about crosstab configurations and templates, and see hopefully a little bit different than we're normally used to seeing our crosstabs and templates. So today's agenda will look at a couple different reports. We're actually going to look at a table as well and kind of do a little review on the crosstabs and how that's set up. And then we'll get into crosstab Excel templates. And then just a reminder as part of that, that if you want to see them in Enterprise, that you do need to publish both the crosstab and the report. And today I will be doing things a little bit differently. I probably will jump back and forth between the slides and some demonstration, just as it lends itself a little bit more to that. The crosstab reports is, I'm sure you're familiar, but just a little bit of a review. We take what we have here in our tabular reports or tabular output and do what we call a crosstab, where we put, in some cases, we typically think of putting our sample test result paradigm into the crosstab. Today we're going to look at a little different things here, but normally we think of either having the locations or the analytes down the left side as rows and have across the top, whether that's our locations or analytes. Some people like the opposite, some like it this way. We'll look at doing a Microsoft Excel template and what's involved in that, and then of course how to publish that at some point if you want to have that available within Enterprise. Again, we take our tabular report, whether that's in this case an Analytical Results 2, and then we cross-tab it. In this particular case, we have our analytes as rows and our locations as columns. Here again, we just have that just to show how we do that, get that across. So today, what I'd like to do is take a little bit different look at it, a little thinking that isn't quite as conventional. I'm going to take a look at the DT lithology table and notice that that crosstab icon is there, and it's just begging to be used. And today we're going to try that. We're going to take this DT lithology table. We're going to bring that into a crosstab design. And notice here I have taken the facility ID and used that as a column header and as a tab data. And we'll see what that gives us. We'll take a look at that. We've put a lot of the lithology information here as just row headers. And so let's take a look at that, what that will come up with when we go ahead and crosstab that. And here we have this crosstab with each location. We have our soil borings. We have a lot of the information. Anything that was populated, I've gone ahead and pulled into this little crosstab presentation for DT lithology. So let's take a look at that. I have Professional open already. So I'm going to come into our data tables. Going to pull that up, go ahead and open DT lithology. And then once that opens, I'm going to do a couple things just to narrow down my data set right off the bat. I'm going to go here and look at just my soil borings for this instance and type in SB there in my syslocate code or my locations, so I come up with just my soil borings. I'm also going to come up to my column chooser and actually come down and just select the hide blanks. And so I'm going to just click on the hide blanks here, get rid of all the blanks, so I just have a data set that is a little more interesting, doesn't have the blank cells. So as I mentioned in the slides, we have the crosstab icon here. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but that's where it is, the last icon here on the mini toolbar. we're going to click on that crosstab icon and pulls up our interface for designing the crosstab. And in this case, because I have cut down the number of columns there, that's what's showing up, is what I've minimized that to. So in this case, we can come in and we can actually drag and drop those over. I've cheated a little bit today and gone ahead and set up my XML. I've saved that. So I will go ahead and open that. And as you can see, I've pulled most all of these fields over to just the row header. A little bit unusual, we have all row headers, and in order to get things to run, I do have to fill in at least a column header, one column header, and one tab data. In this case, I just went ahead and put the facility ID in there because I really don't need, I could go straight from this table and take that to Excel. But in this case, I'm going to group by my location code. I have these, I can put these in more of an order that makes sense to me or wants to have that, so that I can see these in the order I want. Now, what I've done there is just pulled in that template that I have saved. That's an XML, and I just opened that up. I can, once I save or change, if I were to change any of this, I could save that again. So it's always good, as I tell many folks, it's always good once you get a nice XML or a nice crosstab working or close to what you want, to actually save that out and start incrementing. You'll see that I have a number of versions saved, 1, 2, and 3, just to have one that I can go back to if for some reason I really mess things up. So we have this crosstab, and this will, now I'll go ahead and run, click on the go arrow, the green arrow, and this gives me just that crosstab. Again, I have grouped it by each of these locations and have that set there and ready to look at things. Now, one thing that I have done is pulled the crosstab. I also, in this, have a Excel crosstab template. Now, we could, yeah, let's go ahead and jump ahead. We're going to go ahead and pull this template in here and see what it does. What I have done is made some changes in this template. So here again, we use an Excel template. We'll actually open the template here in a little bit, but I just want to show you, give you a little picture of what's possible when we do that. So here, I have created a couple of these. You'll see I have 1, 2, and 3. I have saved these out as an Excel template, an XLT. So I'll open that. I do have the template there now. So again, I can just go ahead and run this. That brings it up just like we saw it before. But now, when I save it out or export it out to Excel, what's going to happen? It's going to ask me for the saving one. You can see I've saved this a number of times as well. And I'll replace that. And this will open it in Excel. Now, one thing that I have done, and we'll look at this in a little bit, we'll look at the actual Excel template. But in this case, I have, and I can see I need to change something in the template. I still have groundwater analytical results instead of some lithology data here. So that needs to be changed. I have my address, and that's all within, those are fields that are coming from DT facility. Those are fields that are in there that are pulling the data out of DT facility. I do have a macro running in this place to conditionally format because this isn't really column headers, and what we have back here is we have these that are coming in really as row headers rather than column headers, and we'll look at that in a little more detail when we get to that. But these are coming in, and normally without the macro that I have in here, and this is doing a conditional, well, not a conditioning, it's doing the cell styles, which we'll get into, but what that's doing is changing these particular column headers. And notice I did not change any of these. These are just straight as they're coming out of the field names. And once again, as we look at and go back to our Crosstab, all of you are probably aware, but if not, we do have this caption here, so we can change that caption and change all of those. And so instead of syslocode, I could put location ID or something like that, and change all of these to give a much prettier, a much better final result. In this case, I have, for most all of these that we're doing today, I've left the actual field names in there so you can have a better idea of when you go to look at this and actually implement that. So that's a quick look at where we can get to. Gives us a little bit more, just a little cleaner report, gives us some information up top. So let's move on. So let's go on to the next step. That's kind of a change, a little bit out of the box or out of the ordinary to use a data table and actually crosstab it. But as you can see, that's quite possible. So let's go back to the slides one more time here. We have that crosstab which pulled up. We had the crosstab interface, and this is where we just drag and drop to put things in order of how we want to do that. And that's fairly easy for today's demonstrations. Again, I've cheated a little bit and actually have those set up and saved, so I can just pull those in without having to go through setting those up. Always a good idea, as I mentioned earlier, to actually save those as you get to points that are a good stopping point or a good transition, and you have it working. So within the professional, EQuiS Professional, the actual Excel template, when we go to get to the Excel template and pull that up, we set that up with really three different sections. We have our header section, which in this case we set up with maybe a table number if we want to do that, a title, and some of this can be set up and put into the header, and then you could save that out for each individual Excel template, which I've done today. Have one for that lithology. I have another one for the analytical results too, which we're going to look at next. Then within the data section, we do need to set up a range, a named range that's called data in this case, and that can be in cell A1, or it may be in A3 or 4 or 10, depends on how many header rows you actually have or want to have in this particular table. And then you can set up your footer section and have qualifiers, have other information in there. Obviously, I think I may have left this footer section in my lithology, which doesn't quite apply, but you can do that, have table, have your numbering, all of those kind of things in there. And that's the start of the template. Within the template itself, you can also, as you'll see here, we can also do cell styles. Now the cell styles are defined so that we have a header, a column header, and a row header. So we have our columns and then our rows, and those are the header information that we'll take a look at. And then within the tab data, as you'll recall, within our crosstab interface where we set up the crosstab, we have a row header section, we have a column header section, and then we do have the tab data. And the tab data can be and is associated with the group column 0 and group column 1, and those two are set up. And once we get into the template, I'll show you how to get these, but typically what we do is click on the normal one, we then right click and duplicate that 3 or 4 times in order to set up these 4 custom ones that we want to use and are set up to go with our Excel template. So once we have that, this is just a little bit of an explanation or a little bit more of how you would set up those cell styles. This information, I do have a link to this information as well as it's here, but I do have a couple links at the end that we can look at in terms of information and help that is out there on the information page. So within the row header, we set that style up, and here there are some differences here in terms of how we set these up. But these can be set up however you want them, whether you want your alignment to be centered and bottom aligned or left aligned. Typically the row headers are left aligned. Here, this particular one has that centered, but you can make those changes, and we'll show you how to do that as we get to the template. We can also do conditional formatting, and that would be in a place where you come in and do conditional formatting, whether you want to set it up where cells that do not contain a blank get set up as bold or red or things like that. We can also do conditional formatting for a number. In this one illustration I'm going to show, we could go in there and we're doing a count of the number of analytes, and we could set that up so that if typically you have 50 results for all the different analytes on a particular event, if that strays a certain number plus or minus, you could do a conditional formatting to highlight that. So you could say, oh, why don't I have the 50 samples that I was expecting? So again, one more slide here just to kind of see, once you're satisfied with your results, you want to then publish it. But here's one where we've done the row header is set up to be green, whereas the column header is in the blue, things like that. So let's now go back into Professional and look at, we've done the DT lithology and DT lithology crosstab, looked at that briefly. Now let's look at an actual report. This is where we would typically think more in terms of where we would be going to do a crosstab. For today's example, I've selected the Analytical Results 2. So I'll open that, and here again, I've done my saving of these parameters, so I don't have to go through and select all my parameters, and that's set up there. I will come down here to the bottom and just note, as Liz so excellently showed us last week about setting up the additional fields and extra select, I have used her start depth, end depth information that she gave us last week and put that in the extra select so that I will have the depth range to work with. So there we have the information or the parameters that I've put in for this today is really just soil samples, normal soils, and a matrix of soil. So if I go ahead and run that, I click on the go button and pull up my data to pull my tabular information. So here I have my tabular data, and my information that my depth range is all the way to the right, so I won't I'll keep your eyes focused. I won't scroll over there, but it is over there. So again, we do come to our crosstab icon here to run our crosstab. And for this one, I'm going to do a little bit different and not just pull results, but I want to find out how things went and what the number of results. So this is a little bit different use for a crosstab. And again, I do have that saved as an XML. I've saved that information out. And that's really, once I have this set up, all you do is come up to the little floppy disk icon and save that. So I do have this saved, makes life a little easier as we go through. So in this case, what I wanted to do was find a count. So I've added the chemical name, and I'm aggregating that by doing a count on that. What I am doing this in order to get my lithology and really I'm just going in my I'm using the DT lithology start depth, which I added as an extra field, and I'm using that and not displaying it. But I'm using it to sort my start depth so that I have my depth range in order. And I'm also using my syslow code and grouping on that so I have each location. So let's take a look at what that looks like just as a crosstab. Here again, notice that the start depth is not showing, but I have that sorted so that I get my depth range. And again, the depth range is what Liz showed us last week in terms of having that, actually having those field together. We have a start depth, a dash, and the end depth, and then the depth units. And that gives us our depth range. What I would like to do, I'll go back and I'm going to actually display this, make this back to default so that you can see what's going on here. And here is our start depth. And so that's what I am sorting on to give me things in the proper depth range. Because Excel and other things like to see that 1, that 14, that 1 is actually smaller than a 2. So if you sort on this field, it's going to sort a little bit differently than you want it to or expect it to. So here we go back. Let me change this back to not being displayed. So here again, we have our crosstab. We have our count, and my data set's not real. Doesn't have a whole lot of data right here, so we only have our 8260s, and it looks like all of our counts are coming up. So we have 10 for each of these, or 10 analytes have been sampled and analyzed for each of these depth ranges. So it's pretty standard. It looks like we're good there. Now, one thing that we can do here is to use our template, to use what we've started and set up. What I can do is go and just to show you how that's selected, we select the Use Excel template. And here I have selected the template. Let me make sure I have the correct one. Yes, I have my count. Actually, I have a count 1 here. Let's use that one. I think I've made a couple of changes there. So here we have our Excel template. Again, all we do is go and use the right arrow, our go button there. We have our template, and now what we will do when we go to Excel, we click on the Excel icon here. We'll ask us where we want to save this. I'll save that over one that I did earlier. And now this comes up and gives us our crosstab with, again, our header information. It gives us, and please forgive me for this, I have left those field names as they are so that you can see those and what they actually are, what's actually in that crosstab. You can change those in the caption, as I mentioned earlier. So here we have this, and notice that our cell styles have come into play. We have our blue here for the header or the column headers, and for the row headers we have a nice orange today, and our data is just in the normal. So that brings us to a nice, count that's pretty straightforward to bring and get us a count for what our samples, how many analytes we analyzed for. Obviously doesn't give us results. So let's go back now and actually get the results. So we have our data set. We have the same data set. In this one, I've done the set it up to do a count. So now let's go ahead. Again, we can use our same crosstab icon. Go ahead and click on our icon, bring that up. Again, I have set this up so that I have two different ones actually, but for today I'm going to use the location on the row. So I have my location on the row just like I had with my count. Again, I'm using my DT lithology start depth to sort to get my depth range in the proper order, and I do have my syslow codes grouped. Again, everything else is pretty straightforward in terms of results and lab qualifiers. Note that I do have the combined tab columns checked so that those will come up with a value and then the qualifier. And here, just the chemical name. If we had a larger data set, we might want to include the analytical method or other things like that. But in this case, my data set's pretty small, pretty straightforward. Again, we can just come up and run the go error and run this report. And here we have our locations. We have our sample code, our sample date, and again, using that depth range that we talked about last week and have put that in here are our results. Now, one thing that we have is notice that this is not formatted, so let's use formatted in terms of the styles and things like that. So in order to use our template and get us into that template, let's go back. I'll just go back here. And again, this is real easy. I'm sure you're aware of this, but you can go back and forth and change this template, this crosstab template, to make things and change things and test things out. And here today, we're going to go in. I'm going to use a template. And again, I do have a AR2 template that I've set up. Again, number one there, have that set, and I will go ahead and use that template and run that. Again, once that template has been added, I can click on the Excel and come into the crosstab report and save that and bring that up. And here again, we've come up and now we have our column headers are coming up in the blue. Our row headers are in the orange. So let's take a look now. We've pulled that up. We've done a little bit there. Let's go ahead now and look at the actual template just to give us an idea of how we work with that. And so here, I'll go ahead and pull this actual template here that we've just used. And here is that template where we have it as just the template itself. And so here we have our header. And in this case, again, I do need to come into my header section and change this to be soil analytical results. We do have our fields, and each of these are coming from DT facility, and they are just in, just put those in the curly brackets to use those as really variables, but it will pull that information if DT facility is populated. So we have the facility name, our address, city, state, and postal code within that. Here is where you'll notice that up here is our named cell, or our named, excuse me, named cell where we type in data, and that is really just the name manager is here under the formulas, and so we have that here as the named range, and that named range is important so that the data knows where to start. This can be set in a different place, and really to actually set it up, you can just click on the cell that you want and then come up here to this corner and type data. But if you do want to change or edit things, then you come to the formulas tab, the name manager, and can come in and edit that and actually change that location just by editing. So that's the data. We do have the footer as well. That's way down there. But within, from the home, what I also wanted to show you here is not only the header and the data range, but here is also where we have our styles. And so within our styles, we have these column headers, and I'm going to go ahead and modify, come into my column header, and these are the ones that I have up. As I showed on the slide, these are the ones that are particular to this crosstab template that need to be in there, so that as the crosstab comes into this template, we have the column header, the group column 0 and group column 1 are our tab data, and that would be if you had your tab data back here within our crosstab setup. If we did not have combined tab columns, if we had separate tab columns, so we would actually have a column for the result and a column for the lab qualifier, that's where this comes into play on these group column 0 and group column 1. So that would be for the tab data, and then of course the row header. Within that column header, we do have the format, so we can come in and actually set up within this how we want, if we want this to be bold, the color, all of that information, the alignment, and here's where if you want that centered or left, horizontal left, you can make those changes. This one is a column header, so I'll leave that in the center, leave that the way it is. But that's how you do that. Within the styles themselves, if we come to a normal, what we can do is right click, and this is how you would set those up to begin with. You would come to your normal and then simply come down to duplicate. That would bring that up as your style name, and this is where you would put in your group column 1 or row header or your column header. And this is how you would set those styles up in the beginning for your template. So in this case, I now have a normal 2, which is fine, and can leave that just the way it is. So I have, we'll have my row header down here as well. So I still have those, but that's how you set up your cell styles within the conditional formatting. You can manage the rules, and at this point I don't have a rule set up in this one. What I did in the other one that was the lithology one, what I basically did there was started a new rule I did cells that only cells that contain, and actually selected my whole row. I actually, excuse me, cancel that. I actually set up a new row, used the whole column or the whole row 1 and set that up and actually changed that to the column header. And in that case, I didn't actually use conditional formatting. I actually did a macro and had a macro to actually just go in and change that row to the column header. And that really was very easy to do. I just went into my data and actually did a macro and just recorded that macro. And you can come in and record that. I just highlighted the row, changed it to that column header cell style, and then stopped the recording, gave it a name, and it becomes part of that Excel template. And once you run that template, it automatically runs the macro. So that brings us to a little bit of a conclusion on what I wanted to show within the EQuiS Professional Crosstabs. I know there's a lot more we can do. There is information here within creating those within the links to the help information, the help. And these two are in particular for creating Excel templates and Excel templates with conditional formatting. Again, remember that if you do want to actually have these available within Enterprise, you not only have to publish this, and that is upload that file, the Excel template, you have to upload to the database. You also would want to actually publish your report itself so that you have those available to run within that. And that would be here within this analytical results crosstab. You would then publish that crosstab report to the database. So that would be there. You would also, if you have logos or things within your template, you would want to make sure those files are actually in the database and available. So at that point, there are any, I'm sure Liz has been answering questions as we've gone along. Let's see what else we have here.
We've got a couple questions, Bill. The first one's from Dan. And Dan, if you want, I saw your hand up as well. So if it's easier for you to articulate the question verbally, I'm certainly happy to unmute you. His question came in when we were showing how to set up the crosstab for the detail ethology table. And he says that he missed the part on how the row headers ended up on the top of the page in the crosstab report.
Okay, these row headers, because I didn't, because the column headers, I'm not displaying those. This is actually, if I take that display off and make it default, I can show you what's going to happen there. So here, the column header now, when I pull that up, will and should have been, well, that didn't do exactly what I wanted it to do. Oh, there it is, right there. It's way at the far right side of that is where the column header actually is, and that's the facility ID. What I have done in order to get rid of that and only have really this first row, because this is really my first row in this situation, what I've done is come in and actually selected none, so the facility ID is not displayed. Really, it's a way to create a crosstab when you really don't need a crosstab, but it helps in terms of being able to get our locations grouped, things like that, get our start depth, get those sorted in order, gives us a nice flow to that, and kind of gives us a quick look at our lithology. And then we can look at this table and say, oh, let's go ahead and pull it into Enviro Insight and have that information all there and look at it visually and actually pick out what we want to show. Where in this case, we've just done a quick, obviously if I have this saved and can just pull that in with pulling the template that I have set up, open DT Lithology, pull in the Crosstab, and have a quick look at that in a tabular format that's a little easier to read than the actual table itself.
Excellent, thanks. It looks like Carl asks, are the footer notes in the Excel template placed in the footer header section of the page set up in Excel, or are they actually in a cell so that they appear directly beneath the last row of report data?
And I don't know the total answer to that. You can put the footer in there, the footer notes, or actually use a footer within the Excel, and if that is then on each page.
Yeah, and so Bill, if you scroll down to the bottom of this Crosstab template, you can see that we've got our qualifiers there, and that and the logo are in the footer. I think you can actually create some sort of macro that would allow you to basically drop in your information at the very end of the table, but that would certainly only be, I think, at the end of the entire data range rather than maybe on each page like the header footer would be.
Yeah, and that would be on the last page, and that would entail a little bit of a macro to find the last row.
Right. He also has a follow-up question. If using the separate tabs by each unique, like a sysloc code, for example, that option, is there any way of pulling the specific sysloc code specific to each tab into the table title details in the header section? Carl, I can answer that, I think, sort of. It is possible, I think, to craft a macro that does that. I believe that I've seen one of our developers do that with an AutoCAD crosstab in the past. I can check and see if we have one piece of information that's sort of existing to carry that information over. And if not, I'll see if we've got someone clever enough to come up with that.
And that, I believe that information is in one of these links where you can actually, within the header row, actually put in sysloc code. And it will pull, if you have those going to a separate, each location to a separate page, it will then put your location ID in your header for each of those pages. You do have to copy that over to each sheet within the template, I believe. I can double check on that.
Yeah, we'll find out more information.
Yeah,
and
I
include
did. I have seen that though within the information in terms of when you do each location on an individual sheet. But you do need to know how many sheets you're going to have.
I see a question there from Amy. Is there a place where past office hours are located? Great question, Amy. That's actually on our Earthsoft website. Let me go ahead and stick that in the chat window for you as well. I happen to have that up already. You can also check them out on our YouTube channel, and there's also a screencast channel if YouTube is blocked by your organization. So I guess with that, thank you so much everyone for attending, and we hope you have a wonderful remainder of the year and a happy new year. And thanks again, Bill.
Thank you. Thank you.